civilization cycle, interviews experts and individuals who understand the intensifying cycle of economic, societal, and government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
All right. Welcome to Mountain High Time. Does the Earth really flip upside down? What is a micronova? I brought Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project to lay it out, to explain it. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
And here he is.
Oh, there we go. There I am. Thank you for having me on, Ransom. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Let's talk science.
All right. So where do you want to begin with all the nonsense, fear porn, flipping Earth, micronova garbage?
Well, let's just start in the Younger Dryas, because there seems to be two camps, the micronova people and the people that kind of stick to terrestrial events and events that are possible with our own solar system.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it in generalities. There are not two camps. There's only one camp, and as far as the Younger Dryas event is concerned, that has come to the forefront. And that camp is, and maybe you could pull this up, the Comet Research Group. Just go to Comet Research Group on Google. These guys, a slowly growing team over the last decade or more, these are top scientists in the field of cosmology, impact science, archaeology, and paleontology. The group has been growing, but they published a paper about a decade ago. It might be 11 or 12 years now. And because what they found on the Younger Dryas boundary, so if you don't know what the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is, it's simply that 12,900 years ago, about 15,000 years ago, the Earth began warming out of the last 100,000 year ice age. It was called the Bowling-Allerod warming. And then 12,800, 12,900, specifically, I will give you some dates. Something happened. We warmed 10 or 15 degrees. The oceans began to rise. And then at 12,009 or 12,8 years ago, the temperature dropped 15 C back into an ice age and remained there for 1,300 years. And around 11,005, we warmed back up to the Holocene warm where we are today, in this beautiful warm environment where civilizations have flourished. Now, early on, the early paleontologists and archaeologists had some hypotheses on what happened to create this Younger Dryas cooling. And in recent times, they're blaming it on the Clovis people. There are actually peer-reviewed papers that claim that the Clovis people murdered all the mammoths in North America at the time, and because of the fires they were creating, they created global warming, and it destroyed the planet. This is completely insane. These are peer-reviewed papers. So what happens? I can't hear you.
I was going to say, these are the same people that think that the farts are killing us now, despite the number of stuff back then.
Yeah, this is fart science, and it's completely peer-reviewed, and it's funded by the government. It's insane.
All right.
So an independent group of misfit scientists like myself that actually do field work. Can you believe this? The scientists that actually are making breakthroughs actually go out into the field and look at the rocks. They touch them. They do stratigraphy. They do paleontology. And so a bunch of these rogue scientists started going out and looking at this Younger Dryas boundary, the YDB. And what they found was astonishing. worldwide in the northern hemisphere and some sites in the southern hemisphere, they started to find things like impact glass. Now, impact glass only occurs when debris from space hits Earth at very high speeds. And so you've got like asteroid particles or cometary debris. If they hit the ground and when they hit the crust at 20,000 miles an hour, they melt it. And a splash occurs and it creates impact glass. And we've got this in South America. We've got this all over Australia. We've got it in North America and Europe. We've got it in Africa.
This is where you get the heavy elements?
No, I'm talking about impact glass alone.
Okay.
So not all of the sites that are on this map are impact glass, but like the Atacama Desert has impact glass that dates to 12,009 or 12,8. In North America, we have the same thing. So as more scientists, because remember, this takes field work. So 2 guys going to look, it takes thousands of dollars, hours of time. It grew. Over the last decade, we now have dozens of scientists looking all over the world at this Younger Dryas impact around 12.8, 12.9. And what they started to uncover through peer-reviewed research, which was first, and Leah and I have covered this over on our channel, Magnetic Reversal News, at great length over the last 4 years. When they initially uncovered platinum spikes and iridium spikes and other anomalies in the ice cores or the sedimentology of the region right on the Younger Dryas boundary, they started to report cosmogenic elements in high percentages, which suggest cometary impact or something extraterrestrial affecting Earth at this time, which completely corroborates paleontologically what happened. At 12,800 years ago, 65% of all the megafauna in North America went extinct in an instant. And so there has to be some explanation for that. And so mainstream science said, well, the Clovis people killed them all off because they're just greedy little Ice Age hunters. When I first saw that idea, my head exploded. I said, how stupid is science? Because there is no... Could you imagine if you and I said, let's tell the whole world to kill every deer? Because we have billions of people on Earth, we may be able to accomplish that, but the probability of eliminating all the deer on Earth is 0 because there is hundreds of billions of them. I think we've got 80 million deer within 800 square miles of me. Right. Pennsylvania kills like 400,000 deer annually just to reduce the population for fun. They give everyone, no, you don't need a hunting license. You just go out and murder them tonight. You can shoot them at night. They use lights, and they just kill all these deer because all they do is eat everything, and there's a total overpopulation. This has to do with the environmentalists removing things like coyotes and mountain lions from the ecosystem. Right. And so, thank God, Colorado, we just had a bill during the election. They wanted to eliminate mountain lion hunting. And it didn't pass, thank God. Right. Because what we would have in 5 years is 45 million elk eating everyone's landscaping.
Right. And one of the biggest problems I had with that idea of the Clovis people totally eviscerating all the megafauna is that there are other places in the world where there were groups of people that had equal technology, and they didn't wipe out the megafauna there. So Africa, they've been hunting nonstop, and over in Asia, they were hunting megafauna, but all of it didn't disappear in those areas.
Yeah, it's funny. Only in modern times, when we have billions of people, are now the megafauna in Africa threatened. And this is only because they said you can't hunt them. Once you can't do something, everyone wants to do it. You know what I mean? Right. And so it's only now when billions of people are on the earth, 8 billion for goodness sakes, that now the megafauna in Africa are threatened. But something happened 12,900 years ago that destroyed all the megafauna in North and South America. And no one knew why. Global warmists, climate freaktards. The only way to get funding is to do research related to that topic. So they came up with these cockamamie ideas that the Clovis people hunted all the mammoths to extinction. The only problem with that is that we have these strewn fields, and you're showing them there in the gray and the blue. There are strewn fields which are indicative of massive impacts on Earth, which have the melt glass. And many of the sites that don't have melt glass have platinum and iridium spikes, as well as other cosmogenic precursors or proxies. So in this same boundary, microspherules are found, which are a type of splatter from the melt glass, which create perfect spherical glass beads. These can only be formed in one way: impact. And so the evidence is piling up all the way now, 2024. We've got dozens of cases of peer-reviewed evidence which are called impact markers. So the first of these came out in 2007. Studies documented spherules, nanodiamonds, and many other things. Let me see if I can move this. Yes, charcoal in similarly aged materials on that YDB boundary. That's the Younger Dryas boundary. The studies tie their observations to possible impact evidence, and this is the first study that became highly controversial and everyone attacked the Comet Research Group. Once they found the nanodiamonds, the spherules, the platinum spike, burnt forests all on that layer, everyone attacked them. And the reason is because their livelihood is at stake. Everything they've ever done their entire life is now threatened because actual field geologists are now uncovering what happened at the beginning of the Younger Dryas catastrophe. It was clearly a major impact. Now, prior to this discovery, we had also known of major outwash events, including all of the massive flooding that happened in the Pacific Northwest. This flooding is so insane and well documented. Randall Carlson is a great repository of information on these floods. But what you have is the entire Pacific Northwest being washed off the face of the earth in a very short period of time. All of the soil column, everything on the planet in that spot at this time was removed and washed into the Pacific Ocean in an instant, creating the channeled scablands, which have waterfalls. If you know about Niagara Falls, there are waterfalls that once existed in the channeled scablands 12,900 years ago that were 100 times larger than Niagara. Some estimate 10,000 times larger. So that would be an unimaginable outwash event. The only way to get that type of thermodynamics on Earth is through impacts.
Is this
because? Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, is this the exact same time as we kind of know the shelf on the East Coast had an avalanche type scenario for massive flooding?
Well, that's a different phenomenon. So after these giant comets hit the ice sheet 12,900 years ago, one object was so big, and this is in the region of the Great Lakes. The main piece hit up in the Great Lakes region. And when it hit the ice sheet at that spot, which was about 5 miles thick, it hit at like 20 to 30,000 miles an hour. And so it vaporized the ice sheet. Very high temperatures. We're talking tens of thousands of degrees on impact. What it did is it blasted several square miles of ice chunks up into space, all at relativistic speeds. These pieces of ice are traveling at near the speed of light, for goodness sakes, hundreds of thousands of miles an hour after this impact. Boom! and they all go up into space all at once, and then they slowly re-enter Earth's atmosphere, and they create what is called the Carolina Bays. There are millions of these oval impact structures. And so what would have been happening at the moment of that big boom hitting on the East Coast, or let's say east of the Mississippi, or let's say Kansas east, all of that area is being now hit by ice bolides, ice impactors coming back in at relativistic speeds from space. So they're going to hit the ground at 8,000, Mach 10 is the average speed, 8,000, 10,000 miles an hour, which creates 1 million booms over the period of 24 to 36 hours. This would generate a Category 9 earthquake that lasted for 36 hours. So what occurs during this day and a half of magnitude 9 earthquakes is that the continental shelf on the east coast of the U.S. starts to turbidity current out into the abyssal plain. Turbidites are well documented. They occur during earthquakes, impacts, or any major event. So an event like this, which would be the most significant event in 100,000 years or more, where the earth is ringing at magnitude 9 earthquake for a day and a half nonstop, you're going to get thousands of these massive slides. And so the idea is that tsunamis now begin to slosh back and forth across the Atlantic. There's evidence on the African continent of this, and worldwide that this is exactly what's happening. And so everyone in Africa, for the most part, and North America, they all die from mega tsunamis. And that's just one part of the piece. We have the geophysical evidence for that over the African continent. There's massive fluvial deposits which are indicative of high water flow across the entire continent. The only way you can get to that is if there's very deep water washing across Africa recently, and the evidence still exists. There's no evidence in North America of these tsunamis except for the paleontology on the entire east coast of North America. The reason there's no evidence in North America is because it rains a lot here and the erosion erases everything. So we still have the Carolina Bays, but the paleontology around 12,900 years ago is more evidence. There are fossilized mammoths in waterlogged bogs, that are standing upright on the east coast of North America, let's say from New Jersey south towards South Carolina, where the fossil structures are the animals standing upright in a bog that get completely buried by tens of feet of mud, and their legs are broken in place while they're standing. So you can imagine if you're out on a happy day on the East Coast during the Younger Dryas catastrophe, and you're nibbling some grass in a pond, and then one of these ice bolides hits at 30,000 miles an hour, plus you've got flooding and tsunamis washing over, and you get buried in mud in an instant.
Right.
Plus your legs break from where you're standing. These types of fossils are repeated every single time on the East Coast, just like this. So they suggest that the idea I just shared about the Carolina Bays, the impact hypothesis, and what happened on the East Coast is pretty well corroborated with paleontology, fossils, and the Carolina Bays. Now, as far as the rest of the evidence, let's talk about the platinum spike and the iridium. So the Comet Research Group got together, more scientists joined along as the attacks built up, because once the 2007 study hit, they were being attacked by every mainstream scientist available whose job was threatened by this information. But as technology increased in 2013, 11 years ago, a platinum spike at the start of the Upper Dryas event was documented in Greenland. And then 10 more scientists worldwide took up this topic, and they found it everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. The problem with the 2013 data and how they got attacked was there was no accompanying iridium spike. But that is not necessary to prove cosmogenic origin. There is no reason platinum should spike on planet Earth based on anything unless it comes from space. So 5 years later, or 4 years later, researchers documented platinum spikes at 11 sites. This happened right after the Comet Research Group got together. They broke apart. They said, okay, you guys in Europe do this, you do this over there, you do this over there. And guess what? Not a single group of scientists looking at the Younger Dryas boundary didn't find anything. So the only way, in my opinion, that this hypothesis is untrue is if there was a group of scientists that went to the Younger Dryas boundary and they were like, hey, we didn't find platinum, we didn't find microspherules, we didn't find nanodiamonds, we didn't find anything. But what they all did was they found everything back in 2017. Right. And so the naysayers were told to go back in their hole. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Nothing. I was just entertaining the idea that you would have to have iridium and platinum. That would mean that every single object came from the same place in exactly the same way.
Right, because winds are going to blow and other things are going to happen, right?
Right. Well, just the idea that every single object would have both of you would have to have them together. I don't see that.
Right. So subsequently, platinum spikes have been documented in Canada, Europe, the Middle East, Northwestern South America, Chile, South Africa, everywhere scientists went. And so new work on samples from South Carolina determined a platinum to palladium ratio that is not characteristic for terrestrial materials. So the naysayers, some of them back in 2015 started to say, no, during an ice age, there's no rain, it's very high dust, and so what happens is these rare earth elements blow around the planet, which is why they come up in the ice. But because of the new work on samples from South Carolina that looked at the platinum-palladium ratio, they proved that this is not characteristic of terrestrial deposits. So it had to be cosmogenic, meaning from space. Now, Interestingly enough, the platinum spike in South Africa was then precisely dated to 12,744 years ago, which is exactly the estimate, 12.8, 12.9, of the Younger Dryas catastrophe. So the evidence is piling up that this has nothing to do with overhunting from Paleo-Indians and everything to do with a huge comet impact on the ice sheet.
Is that one there around Israel? Isn't that the airburst location that we talked about on a different show?
Abu Hayer, yes. A lot of people over in Egypt, the Fertile Crescent, they see areas of burning on ancient Egyptian artifacts. And so an airburst, which I'm pretty sure you know, was documented in Ohio about 700 years ago, which decimated the Hopewell culture. The same type of cosmogenic things have been shown. So you get burning, scarring. It's almost as if there was like a blast furnace that melted things rapidly and stopped. It only lasted for a millisecond. So the same thing from the Chelyabinsk or the Tunguska event. One of the pieces of the comet, obviously we've got hundreds of cometary pieces entering. The main piece hits the ice sheet in North America, but some pieces hit Europe, Africa, Asia, etc. Atacama Desert included. There's tons of peer-reviewed papers about a 12,800 year ago event which burn the surface of the Atacama Desert, creating melt glass and a strewn field. And the same thing is happening here in Abu Hayera. I believe that was the paper in Iraq. And the burning is dated paleontologically and through pollen to this exact same time period. More corroboration of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. All right, you ready?
Yeah. Do it.
All right, so that's like everything I know in support of the YDB impact hypothesis. We've got huge flooding in the Pacific Northwest from the instant melting of the 5-mile thick ice sheet. That would also cause huge amounts of fresh water to wash into the Arctic Ocean, which would be released out here and through the islands between Greenland, and that would shut down the AMOC, which is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. If that shuts down, most of the upper latitudes here go frozen. And so the moment the Younger Dryas impact happened, the entire ice sheet melts. And the irony is the Earth gets even colder.
Right.
And that's because the ocean currents can't bring warm equatorial waters up to the north. You don't need any currents in the Pacific because it's so gigantic. It is such a heat sink that anything on the coast of the Pacific is always going to be warm, even up into Alaska.
Right.
Even in an ice age, which is why we get the ice-free corridor. But the Atlantic is like, they call it the pond. It's a tiny ocean. It's not, it's eclipsed by the Pacific. And so if you stop the warm water circulation, which basically flows around the entire Earth like this, it's even bigger than what I'm tracing here. But if you prevent the water of the Gulf Stream to get up into the maritime Atlantic and Canada, it gets very cold in the Northeast, and all of Europe freezes. And that's exactly what happened.
I was going to ask you, in today's world, with nowhere near the amount of fresh water frozen at the pole, it would be a lot harder to create the same scenario, despite them putting a lot of articles out about this happening again.
Well, that's not that true, because every year in the winter, the Arctic Ocean freezes, and the water that freezes is fresh water, not salt water. And then once you get a thin skim of fresh frozen water, all of the precipitation that hits it is more fresh water. And so what's been happening in the last 10,000 years in the Holocene warm is that we are desalinizing the Arctic Ocean.
Okay.
Desalinizing it. And in fact, there's a huge portion of the Arctic Ocean called the Beaufort Gyre that is mostly fresh water. So every time that ice builds in the winter, in the summer it melts, and that fresh water has a density difference than the salt water, and they separate. I don't know if you've ever scuba dived or snorkel. No. You can see this phenomenon in lakes and rivers. In lakes in North America at the winter, you can scuba dive down to like 50 to 90 feet, and you can find the thermocline. The thermocline is a separation of water density, and when you look at it, it's like oil and water separating in a salad dressing jar. After time, you can literally see a density difference. You can put it right in the middle of your goggles. The same thing happens with salt and fresh water. They don't like to mix, and they tend to stay separate. So the Beaufort Gyre is a gigantic freshwater repository in the Arctic that's been building for decades, and it hasn't released in quite some time. And if it does release and it has significant fresh water and it comes out here into the North Atlantic, it could shut down that jet stream.
What kind of
the Gulf Stream? What
I meant was there was these giant, ice shelves and stuff on the land that was outside of the ocean then that don't exist in the same way. So it'd take a while to build up and release fresh water compared to like more instant.
The difference is that we're in a Holocene, the Holocene maximum, which is called an interstadial. These interstadials have been going on for a few million years during the Ice Age that we're in, which is about 2.5 million years long. We're still in the Ice Age. And about every 100,000 years, we come out of it into an interstadial. And about 1.5 million years ago, it was every 41,000 years that we did this. But at the peak of the Wisconsinian, let's go back 26,000, 30,000 years ago. We've got 5 miles of ice about to catastrophically melt up in the Arctic, as well as Antarctica. That ice is still there. But up in North America, when there is 5 miles of ice up here, there's no precipitation in the Northern Hemisphere. There's no rain. Not like right now in the interstadial. We've got massive flooding events, rain, fresh water falling from the sky. Once all of the water on Earth is locked up in glaciers, there's no more weather.
Right.
So it doesn't rain ever. It's just dust and ice. It's hellish. There's almost no weather. And that's the difference. You don't need like 5 miles of ice in the Arctic to do the same things we're talking about right now. You just need weather. And clouds, like a single rain event, can produce 20 inches of water. We just had one in the Pacific Northwest. We just had one at Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. Right. So these events don't happen during the Ice Age. So just because we don't have ice doesn't mean the same things can't happen.
Okay.
Right. So what happened during the Younger Dryas catastrophe is a comet hit the ice sheet and melted enough water to produce 100-inch rainstorm for a month, let's say. Yeah. And so it's just a different climate and a different effect, but you don't need an ice sheet to do the same thing.
Okay.
You just need fresh water. All right, so let's get into some of the cockamamie theories. So you recently had people bitching at you because, well, the problem is you know more actual peer-reviewed science than most people. So when you start to bring up things you know and they get butthurt, they go back to the propaganda, brainwashing, and fake stories, correct?
Yeah, basically. They get mad at me because I don't prescribe to the ideas of a flipping Earth. for one, because that's always been silly to me. And then two, my whole understanding of what a micronova is not what they're talking about. Nothing close to it, actually.
Right. So there's this guy, Ben Davidson, that I used to follow, and he's got a huge following. He's almost up to 1 million followers. He's wrote textbooks on the sun. Most of his information is relatively good and based on actual science. But in the last few years, he started crowdfunding and getting his followers to buy him an RV, a $1 million campground, which is going to be his, retirement fund, because he now has 80 slots at $500 a month, literally taking in tens of thousands of dollars a month.
What's the trailer court's name? Oh, I'm just kidding.
The Death Ranch or whatever it's called, it doesn't matter. But he started to propose this idea of micronova several years ago. Now, the whole nomenclature of micronova has been in the scientific community for longer than he proposed it. But he claims to be the inventor of the word, I believe. But he is not. A micronova is a small, localized, quote-unquote, thermonuclear explosion that occurs on the surface of a white dwarf star. Apparently, he didn't even read the definition of what a micronova is. Our star is a yellow dwarf. And based on the fake science, which is the current cosmology we use, in a few billion years, our sun may shrink down and become a white dwarf. But in the meantime, we're a yellow dwarf, so we do not even have micronova as a possibility on our star. And the reason that is pretty simple. Because micronova right here are micronova specifically form on white dwarfs with strong magnetic fields, which is not our sun. You see, because if our sun was a white dwarf with a strong magnetic field, all of the planets in our solar system would have already been sucked into it, and we would all be dead.
Right.
Not only that, here is an artist impression, and this is the only really peer-reviewed paper on the micronova phenomenon. You need a white dwarf star here, which is the big star, and you need a smaller partner star in close proximity, let's say in the orbit of Mercury, and the larger white dwarf is cannibalizing this star. It's literally sucking the material into its photosphere here. And so as that material builds up, it creates an instability in the white dwarf, and then it has to eject the material and go boom. But our star does not fit any of the micronova criteria.
See, I guess the theory is that they were trying to explain away these heavy elements and cosmogenic material 12,800 years ago as this event that doesn't happen on our star.
Well, the funny thing is, Ransom, that we are well aware of an event that happens on our star that's completely unexplainable, and it's the Miyake event. It's an observed sharp enhancement of the production of cosmogenic isotopes by cosmic rays, including beryllium, chlorine-36, and even platinum. How do you like them apples?
All right.
All right, and these events have occurred. We just discovered them using dendrochronology. This is tree rings. And because we have very advanced techniques to look at those tree rings, mass spectrometers and other techniques, and our science is getting better and better, just recently we discovered that our sun does something that's not a micronova. It's called a Miyake event. And maybe a Miyake event can explain some of the cosmogenic things that have occurred in the past, but certainly not the Younger Dryas impact. So our sun doesn't micronova, but our planet does get hit by comets. And we know this because we've proven it at the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, which has a platinum and iridium spike and the mass extinction of dinosaurs. And thank God that happened, because you and I wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Right. There'd be no room for us.
So these Miyake events we don't know what they are, but it's certainly the event coming from our sun that we need to look into. The good news is that we've discovered at least 5 of these events in the Holocene: 71, 76 BC, 52, 59 BC. And then we've got the most famous is the Charlemagne event, 774 CE, and a recent one just about 1,020 years ago, the 993, 994 carbon-14 spike. But what's funny is if you lay this over a graph of like humanity or whatever, it doesn't correspond to anything that's deadly or dangerous. Like, it doesn't match up with the plague. It doesn't match up with civilization-ending events. But it may very well explain the millions of petroglyphs worldwide that are all the same, that mimic plasma discharge, that our friend Dr. Anthony Peratt proved in a lab at Los Alamos are exactly these petroglyphs.
Same shape everywhere. Everywhere I've ever been.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't been to Sardinia in the middle of the Atlantic, but the same squatter man is all over the caves there.
Yeah.
All over Europe, all over Africa, Middle East.
Actually,
so go ahead.
Oh, I was going to mention, reading a lot about 536 and that Justinian plague era. There's some cosmogenic evidence in that too. And like, they don't really point to a specific object, but just material raining down. And I was wondering how much that has to do with the possibility of igniting volcanoes, at least electromagnetically.
Well, Lee and I have 2 podcasts on the Justinian plague and the worst year to be alive. And then the first one, what we uncovered on our research, was not a Miyake event, because it's not here. It's not in the tree rings. But guess what happens 1 year before the plague takes hold? There is a platinum spike. And so based on the data, we were like, wait a minute. Oh, what? This is a comet impact right before the plague.
Right.
So you get a comet impact, a very big one, in an area that there weren't a lot of people, because there's no real records of it happening, except for one, I think maybe in Asia, they did see a shooting star. But
right.
then
Also,
based on, go ahead.
I was going to say, they also had reports in Southeast Asia of a super loud sound that carried over way far away from where they were at. So maybe some of the what they thought were volcanoes were this event.
Well, there were volcanoes. So Lolopanga, we've got Iceland erupting at the same time. All this is new science. So it appears, based on what we researched a year ago, is that a comet hit, and then 2 VEI 6-7 volcanoes erupted. Whether it's associated with the impact or the ringing of the earth, increased cosmic rays, it's anybody's guess.
That was my next question, is about maybe the ringing itself is what triggered pressure to release. Because from what I can tell, it seemed like there was more than just 2 giant ones. There was also smaller ones, like in El Salvador and different places like that.
Right. So if you've got volcanoes that are priming to erupt, let's say their magma's building, it's the eruption is a few years off or whatever, but it's building, or even 10 or 20 years off, and then you ring the earth, that type of seismic activity is going to crack existing faults. Let's say Hunga Tonga. We just discussed this, Lee and I, that what happened was a secondary fault caused that eruption. It had nothing to do with the volcano itself. Something cracked on the earth, it let the seawater in, and we get the most impressive eruption of our lifetime. So if we've got a comet coming in, boom, and it rings the Earth, faults could move, and it will trigger multiple volcanic eruptions worldwide.
Yeah, so it'd be like that wave that was detected before the explosion, but it would be caused by impacts, right?
Exactly. And so the wave before the eruption was from a fault moving. So an impact that causes faults to move is the same thing, only it's an external trigger. So what I think is going on around the world is a bunch of bad science. But people like clicks, people like to make money, and so even some of the most famous alien encounters, I went out and called these guys out. And many of them are like, yeah, I might have been struck by lightning. So, but they stick with the same story.
Well, they already wrote the book.
Right. So you got to keep selling those books. And Ben Davidson already wrote the textbook. He's got his space weather textbooks in schools, which doesn't have, I don't think, Earth tilting in it. I hope it doesn't. But he has another small pamphlet book for like $20 that talks about his stupid hypothesis, which no scientists in the world support, none of them. The majority of ethical, smart people like myself and my partner Leah, when they look at the data, there's no evidence to suggest that this has ever occurred. The washing of giant things over the ocean. If the Earth were to tilt 45 degrees or more, every single living thing would be eliminated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they keep pushing this idea of the Earth's rotation slowing down or going in reverse and mixing up those ideas.
No, they're talking about the core reversal. The core reversal is also stupid people not understanding what's happening. The core and the crust basically spin at the same speed. But what has recently happened is the core is now spinning a microsecond slower. So they're all spinning at the same direction and the same speed. The core is just retrograde.
Right.
It's
like
trying
Venus.
Exactly. We're all
it's going in reverse.
It's not going in reverse. It's a millisecond slower than the crust. That's it. So
right, I slowed you down on your articles.
What'd you say?
I said I slowed you down on your articles. I'm sorry. Here we go.
No, we're done. We've covered everything.
All right. Yeah, so let me see here. Where do they get this idea? Is it just that Adam and Eve story that they get this from? Or is there something else that is adding to that? Because, there's this concept. I've seen it on Ancient Aliens, all kinds of different things, of this just worldwide massive wave that washed across, and somehow, there was tall enough trees for us humans to stay on land. I mean, obviously there are giant tsunamis in locations, but not to the point where, and this whole idea of the earth flipping, how did it get back then? I mean, the only thing I could picture is like a rogue planet with enough gravity to tilt the planet. Other than that, I just can't see this scenario happening.
There is an electromagnetic effect that people use to explain this, where they spin an object up in the space station and it rapidly flips, and then it goes back to its original position. But this has nothing to do with the electrodynamics of our solar system. It's just a fancy trick they show to be like, hey, see? Here's the problem. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that object has nowhere near the mass or, energy that's in the Earth. It's a tiny little object. It just no resistance to flip.
Well, and Charles Hapgood's idea of crustal slip and the Adam and Eve story have nothing in common. They're not based on anything scientific. There's no evidence of either of them happening. They're completely two different ideas. Hapgood's crustal slip makes zero sense because we have magnetic data from rocks going back millions, hundreds of millions, billions of years. And we know that the North Pole of Earth has always been the North Pole unless the magnetic field shifts. And so the magnetic field shifting north to south doesn't mean the Earth flips. It just means the magnetic field flips. All the evidence suggests that we've always been in this orientation. And what happens is there are slow pulses of crustal displacement. Whether that's due to expanding Earth or plate tectonics is the next argument. But the evidence is pushing towards Earth's expansion theory, not plate tectonics, which means that the Earth was much smaller and we've been growing ever since. And the growth occurs in spurts. And these spurts happen during mass extinction events, which go from one geologic time period to the next. So those major shifts, when all the biome gets mixed up, is due to Earth expansion and a complete reworking of gravity and landmass. So, yeah, we're far away from knowing anything. But I can assure you that the Earth doesn't tilt and oceans don't wash over the continent because I'm a geologist, and there's not a single deposit throughout all of sedimentary rock history, which is almost 800 million years, that would show that. We would see a deposit of that and we would know it. And there aren't any.
Not to mention,
maybe Ben should talk to a geologist.
Well, I was just thinking,
scared to death too.
We know nothing like that happened during the history of man, because you would think that, they would document the sky changing that dramatically.
Well, yeah, and Homo sapiens have been here now, we think 315,000, keeps getting pushed back. So if, according to Ben, this happens every 12,000 years, that means that man would have experienced 20 of these Earth tilts and not a single documented representation of one in petroglyphs or in any stories or mythology handed down through time.
No, the stars are the same, and they keep their importance throughout time, so we know it was basically stable throughout all time of humans.
Which is why Hamlet's Mill, written in the 1970s by von Deschen, is the most important piece of literature in our entire scientific nomenclature. It showed that all ancient cultures were aware of the precession of the equinoxes, which means they knew every 26,000 years the Earth is moving through space in a spiral for some reason, and this has been going on forever. There is no way that if the Earth tilts that they would have known that.
Well,
it would have broken up everything. So we've been moving through space in a spiral in perpetuity for hundreds of thousands of years. And this is also corroborated through the Sumerian kings list, for goodness sakes.
Right. I was going to ask you one last thing about that. Do you think that we've been at least documenting the precession of the equinox for 75,000 years? And the reason I say that is because the last 26,000, you wouldn't know that it was a pattern. So you'd have to be watching for 52,000. And to verify it, you would have to have another 26,000 to know that it absolutely repeats the pattern.
Yeah, it's probably, we've been looking at it since we've been us.
Right.
And maybe other hominids have been looking at it as well. It's the only thing without technology that you look at, because once the sun sets, that's all you see. So can you imagine everyone staring up at the sky forever?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we know. That's everything we know. All the stuff that's happened in recent time is mostly bullshit.
That's a good, I think we'll close on that.
Great show.
Thank you for coming on and straighten out some of those ideas. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching. And don't forget to watch the nightly broadcast on Magnetic Reversal News and Oppenheimer Ranch Project.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Ransom.
Sweet. Peace out, everybody. YOLO.
That's very dirty.
How do you feed your families when the shelves are empty, the stores are shut, and there's no food available? What is the fastest, easiest, and most productive foods to grow? What is the quickest way to get somebody who has no skills at all up and running and producing very quickly? If you understand that we're at a point in history where it is no longer optional to be growing your own food. If you're like really freaked out and concerned because you've never grown food before and you don't have any skills, you don't know how to do that, but you know how important it is, then I want to let you know, however you stumbled here, you're in the right place. My name is Marjorie Wildcraft. I'm the founder of the Grow Network, and I have been the female leader in the survival and preparedness space for the last 20 years.
How to grow lots of food, even if you have no experience, are older and out of shape. This is for people who want the fastest and easiest ways to produce healthy and delicious meat, eggs, and vegetables. Because you know that growing your own food is like printing your own money. During this webinar, you will get status of global food shortages, how long the crisis will last, how much space you need to grow food, easiest, highest calorie foods you can produce, a complete plan for producing all the food you need, how to get started today, regardless of season. Marjorie will show you the fastest, easiest, and simplest ways to produce calories and nutrition, especially in a crisis and/or grid-down situation. The assumption is that you have no experience and you need to start producing food immediately. The most popular part of the webinar is the Q&A session at the end. So please come prepared with your questions.